Oh hey, it's Wes, and today we're going to talk about the Sony Zeiss 35 f1.4 E-mount lens. Let's have a closer look. So this guy is one of the older fast aperture E-mount lenses to have hit the market. This was back when a lot of, if not most of the E-mount lenses that came out were co-branded with Zeiss. Seems like Sony needed a little bit of help getting their lens market off the ground, and a lot of the stuff that they came out with was pretty spectacular. And just to put this out here, this is one of my favorite lenses. It's not perfect, we'll get into that soon. This is a long-term review, quite long-term. I've had this lens for quite a while, and I have probably taken in the neighborhood of about 80,000 pictures with this lens. I'm a wedding photographer, and this is the lens that generally sits on my main camera for most of the beginning of the day, for all the indoor shots, prep, and even a lot of the outdoor work, some ceremonies. If it's a low light ceremony, this will be on one of my cameras, along with an 85 1.4 on the other. If you pair this up with the 85 1.4 G Master, you end up with almost the exact opposite sort of lens. And I'm not just talking about focal lengths. Well, let's get into that. Number one, build quality. This lens is one of the more old school lenses when it comes to build quality. You've got a lot of metal right here. Focus ring, it's carved metal. Lens hood, it's actually a metal lens hood. Whole body, it's metal. Additionally, you have a clickable, declickable aperture ring. So on the side, you have a button to turn that off and on, a switch rather. And that's all that's on that lens. I'm not a big fan of aperture rings, but I know some people are. So, to each their own. Let's turn this thing around to the back, and you'll see that although this is rated as a weatherproof, weather-sealed lens, there is no O-ring on the back of this. We've just got some metal making contact with the body. Although we have very solid construction, I would prefer to see an O-ring on the back. I know that's something that a lot of the early Sony lenses are missing, but if we had that, it would probably be a 10 out of 10. Otherwise, we have an 8 out of 10 for build quality. Next up, image quality. This is straight up objective measurements. The subjective part comes next, which is image character. So, image quality. This is where we get into some controversial issues with this lens. There are amazing copies of this lens in the wild. There are mediocre copies of this lens in the wild. If you check out DxO, the copy that they have is just phenomenal. Edge-to-edge sharpness. I don't know where they got that copy. I've spoken to quite a few people online who have had similar problems that I have had. The first copy of this lens I had, I don't know if it was decentered or just not well built. The whole left side of the frame was very soft. It was unusably soft. Now, if I were to take a picture, say with my iPhone, it would be about as sharp as the pictures on the left side of this frame, this lens are. However, when we're talking about a lens that is $1,600 US, pretty much the whole frame should be sharp. And I'm not talking about wide open, I'm talking about at any aperture, the whole left side of the frame was what I would consider to be unusably soft. We're talking a soft kit lens soft. The very, very center, and just to the right of the center, very sharp, quite sharp. Not as sharp as my 55 1.8, but very sharp. And so the whole time I was using this lens, I had to always keep in the back of my mind to avoid compositions where any eyes or subjects would be in the left side of the frame. When I was doing group pictures, I had to make sure the faces were up above that general region. Since I had been complaining about it online and I had pro support, Sony was like, hey, send us this lens, we'll have a look at it, maybe we'll send you a new one. And that's exactly what they did. They looked at it, and they measured the lens, and they said that it was within tolerances for that lens. Now, this is very surprising to me, and unfortunate. They sent me a new lens that they also tested. They actually had it independently tested by Lens Rentals. This one right here. And this one is only soft right about here. And generally speaking, I don't do a lot of compositions where the focal subject is right there. So, not a big deal to me, very sharp. In the center of this lens, it's actually much sharper than the old one was, so that's great. Let's cut right to the chase here. My 85 1.4, my 55 1.8, every other lens I have from Sony, even some of the cheaper ones, have fairly uniform sharpness. This is a characteristic of a modern lens. Older lenses with less elements, less correction, tended to be sharp mostly in the middle, not so much around the edges. All of these newer lenses are very sharp and similarly sharp across the frame, especially once you stop it down a couple steps. 35-1.4 in my estimation, like even this one that's very sharp, right out at the edges, even when you stop it down a little bit, still very soft. This seems to be kind of an old design. Not sure what the deal is with that. At the end of the day, you might have a great copy of this lens. I've had two. On modern standards, I'm going to say image quality for this lens. I know, it's debatable, it's controversial. I can't give this any more than a 6 out of 10. But wait! The next section is image character. And this is where I love this lens. It has a very smooth fall off. It's got a little bit of that Zeiss pop, not quite as much as maybe the Batis 1.8 or even the 55 1.8, but it is there. Very creamy background rendering. It looks lovely. It's got nice round bokeh throughout most of the frame. A little bit of cat's eye, a little swirl in the corners. Some people like that. Not a huge fan of that, but it doesn't get excessive. And interestingly enough, when you have the cat's eyes at the edges, it tends to make things look a bit nervous. But because this is a little softer around the edges of the frame, it actually corrects that a bit and doesn't get as nervous because that smooths things out. And perhaps that's just a characteristic of older designs. They kind of solve those issues themselves. If you look a little closer at the bokeh, if you get the brightness just right, you do see a little bit of onion ringing. So it's not perfect, but I have to give that a solid 8 out of 10 for image character. Really like it. Only a tiny bit of room for improvement. It's great. Autofocus. And this is where this lens knocks it out of the park. This has the latest Sony Direct Drive SSM motor. If you have seen my previous 85 1.4 review, I said that it was a phenomenally sharp across the field. I probably already mentioned that, but the autofocus was lacking. It had kind of the previous generation Sony SSM motor autofocus. This one has the next gen stuff. It is insanely fast and accurate. At most apertures, especially on the A9, this is by far the fastest autofocusing lens that I have used. And I have used the 70-200 GM. I don't know if the focusing element is just smaller in this thing, but it is phenomenal. In backlight, in low light, this thing just can't be beat. And that has been the characteristic of both of the copies of this lens that I have had. Autofocus, an easy 10 out of 10 on this one. Value. Well, a little explanation on value. This is a somewhat subjective thing. This isn't worth it. This is value. So I would consider a high value lens to be one that costs a fairly low amount, but kind of punches above its weight class, like the 85 1.8 and a lot of Sigma's lenses. A lot of first-party lenses aren't going to get high marks for value. I've had some bickering about that in the comments before. That's just the way it is. If I were to review a high-value lens, that would get higher. I don't expect one of Sony's flagship lenses to have a high value, even if I would consider it to be worth it for a professional photographer. So, that being said, what else do we have that compares to this? Let's put it up here. We've got the Sigma 35 1.4, a great lens, not even close to this in terms of autofocus though, $8.99. The new Canon 35 1.4, $16.49. Whew, it's more expensive. The Samyang 35 1.4, which some people love. Again, autofocus, not amazing. I find the rendering is a little bit dry on that one, doesn't have quite the character. $4.99, phenomenal value. Sorry, if I were to review that lens, value would be high. Got this one here at about $1,600, and then, again, a new Nikon 1.4 at $1,700. So, yeah, this is expensive, but compared to its counterparts, it's not that bad. However, it's still not a phenomenal lens by modern standards. The Canon is much sharper than this across the field. It is a beautiful modern lens. Again, it's a little bit dry too, doesn't have the same character that this does. But overall, I'm going to give this a 7 out of 10 for value. I consider it to be an expensive lens, but in amongst its competitors, the price just isn't that high. It is high, but not that high. Like the 85G Master, It doesn't check all the boxes, but hardly any lenses do. Maybe eventually. Well, I guess the 2414, although I haven't touched it yet, seems to check a lot of boxes. If anyone wants to send me one, I would be happy to take a look at it. So overall, we've got 39 out of 50. That's a pretty strong score. It's not the very best. Obviously, there is some room for improvement. As I said, I do expect an iteration of this to come further on down the line with a little orange ring on it. Little, what color is that? Red, orange, bronze G logo on it. Just to be clear, I do love this lens. It is the lens that goes on my camera before any other lens. It's the lens that I put on my camera for most of my videos. Right now we're filming with the 55 1.8 because it's the closest in look to this. When I leave the house though, this lens goes on my camera, and I don't regret it. I mean, take a look at the image samples that I've left here. If you want to see more higher resolution samples, there's a link in the description to a blog post where you can zoomify all these photos and have a closer look. Let me know what you think about this lens, if you've had the same experience as me, or not at all. Let me know down in the comments. If you have any suggestions for future lenses you'd like me to have a look at? Down in the comments. And that's about it for this one. So, until next time, go take some photos.